Hi, I'm Donna from The Masquerade, and today I'm going to work on a project using old neckties. So when tackling a project using a bunch of somebody's old ties, the best way to start is to sort them out and try to get the like colors together so that there's a nice flow of color in your project. You don't want it to be mismatched. You want it to flow nicely from one color to the other. I'm going to put together some pillows. They're memory pillows and a wall hanging. You could make a strip quilt, you could cover an old chair. There's a lot of things you can do with old neckties, but the first thing you have to do is take them apart, and it's very easy. I'll show you how to do it. So the first thing to take a tie apart is to get yourself a seam ripper, turn it over to the back, and then pop this little tab off. It's usually sewn with a big thread. And if there's anything else on the back, like a label, that has to come off as well. And it's usually just a couple of quick pulls of the seam ripper and it's all done. And it looks like this one has an extra tab on the back that somebody hand sewed on there to hold the tie in place. That's going to come off too. And after these things are taken off the back of it, it's really easy to take it apart. If you look at how loosely it's stitched together, you can see I'm just kind of pulling it and it's coming apart. These are big, big, loose stitches. So you can go all the way up the tie, pull one of those stitches out, get your hand on it, and then just pull it right out of the tie. And it opens the whole thing right up. And I'm going to go way up here again and do another one. And get my hand on it. And I can just pull it right out of the tie. Maybe one more. And the whole tie will be opened right up. And there's another tab on the back here. Wow, they used red. Usually they use a similar color to the tie. This company used red. And you'll see a lot of times there's a label on it. This one is handmade in China, 100% silk. Sometimes they're polyester, rayon combinations with silk in them. So whatever you make out of these ties, you have to consider that it's going to be dry clean only. So once you've got the whole thing opened up, there's always an interfacing, and it's loose. It's never sewn into the tie. And you can just pull that whole thing right out. And it's already shaped like the tie. It seems like a shame to throw these things away. I put them in a pile. If I ever want to make a tie, I've got some interfacing already ready to go. So they just go in a pile. So here we have it. Here's our opened up tie. And the next thing to do is to have a plan as to what you're going to make. You can just use it like any other fabric, and you can cut templates out of these ties. You can just use them as they are and sew them together into a quilt. I happen to have some templates done up, and what I'm going to do is stack them. I need 4 of each of these templates to make a pillow, so I'm going to continue taking them apart. I'm going to stack them up in groups of 4 like this, and then I'll cut out my templates and I'll put my pillow together, and I'll show you how that looks. My pillow project is made up of 4 blocks. Each block has 5 wedges in it. So I'm using 20 ties. When I put the wedges on my stack of 4 ties, there's plenty of tie left over. So I could easily make maybe 2 or 3 pillows out of this set of 20 ties. So now I'm going to press these, and then I'm going to cut out my wedges and assemble them just like I would a quilt block. I've got all my pieces cut now, and I'm ready to assemble the block. So I'm going to take off the template, and I'm going to put these first 2 pieces together. You can see that I've cut 1/4 inch bigger around each of the templates. That's just because I want a little bit bigger than the 8-inch finished block that this will make. I want them to be about 8.5. So that way when I put 4 blocks together, I'll have a 16-inch pillow. So I'm going to take this whole stack over to my machine, and I'm going to go chain piecing right down the row, and the first 2 pieces flip together like this. I'm going to start from the small edge, and because I'm working with silks and rayons and polyester, I'm just going to put a little piece of scrap paper behind the beginning of my seam to give it some stability, and then I can tear that off when I'm done. So I want a nice 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to follow the edge of my 1/4 inch foot. I'm going to start with a smaller stitch, like a 1.5, and then I don't have to back tack and add extra thread to the seam. I don't need that bulk in there. Then after I take a few stitches, I can bring it up to a 2.0. And I make sure that I have the smart corners on the ends matched up. So when I'm all done with the seam, I can just pull off that paper and press. So I can go with 2 options here. I can press the seams open, or I can press them all to one side. And I've tried it with them all open, and I still get bulk in the middle, so now I'm going to try it all to one side. We'll see which one I like best. So I'll press them all to one side. So I've got the first 2 put together, and now I'm going to actually put these 2 together. And again, when I match up the pieces at the tip, at the small end, I'm going to put a little piece of paper behind my seam to give it some stability. And I'll press the seams in this direction. I already pressed these ones in that direction. So I've put these 2 together, and now I've got to attach the middle one to each side. So I think I'll just start by adding these to here, and then I'll add the final one. Now to attach the last ones to these. So there's my 4 blocks. Now all I have to do is sew them all together. I'll put together 2, and then 1 seam down the middle. So I've finished the pillow top, and then I finished the pillow back. And now I'm going to put them together. And I'd like to put some piping around the edges, so I took one of the black ties and I cut 1.5 inch strips out of it, pieced them together, and made this channel for the piping. So now that I have the piping made, I'm going to sew it to the front piece of the pillow with the raw edges out. I'm going to start sort of a little bit in on the side, so that when I get back around to the other side, I can cut it exactly to fit and overlap the seam. So to get started, I'm going to start in a little bit from the edge, so that when I come down to the very end, I'll be able to tuck the fabric over the piping to make it look like a seamless end. So here I am, starting in 1 inch or so from the end. And I'm using a piping foot so that my piping will run right through. So my piping will run right through nicely. And when I get to the corner of the pillow, I want to be able to turn that corner. So I'm going to snip into the piping. So I took my scissors and I cut in diagonally at a 45-degree angle right to where the stitching is on the piping, and then that way I'll be able to turn my corner easily like that. So I'm going to stitch right down to put my needle in at the top of that slice I made, and then I'm going to lift my foot and I can turn the corner, the foot back down, make sure the piping's inside the foot. And that's how I turn my corners. So I'm at the end where it's time to connect the 2, and I want the piping in the middle to butt right up against the other end, one end against the other. But I don't want to cut it right here right now because I want to have some extra fabric. So I'm going to cut it down here, and then I'll pop some stitches off of the piping so that I can open up the fabric. So that I can undo the piping right up to where it's going to butt up against itself. And then I can see exactly where they're going to meet. And I can take my scissors and go right in there and cut that exactly where it needs to be. Now, the reason why I didn't start sewing at the very beginning was so that I could get this fabric underneath. So I'm going to fold it in a little bit so there's no raw edge. And then I'm going to put this piping on top of it. And I'm going to make sure the ends meet up nicely. And I'm going to fold it over. And make sure it's nice and tight. And then I can stitch it right off the end. And that's how you finish it off. So here's with the piping all the way around it. Now it's time to put it right sides together with the back of the pillow and sew it again with the piping foot. And I'm going to leave one edge open. So I'm going to leave the bottom edge open. And I want to show you the pillow form I bought has a zipper in it so that you can open and stuff it more if you want to with polyfill or take some out, whatever it is. So I want to be able to access that. So what I'm going to do is I took a piece of 1.5 inch tie and I finished it off, serged it on both ends, and I turned the edges down so I have no raw edges on the two ends. And on the bottom of the pillow, I'm going to attach this piece right sides together with the bottom edge of the pillow so that when I stuff my pillow, I'll be able to access that zipper after the pillow's all put together. So I want to show you how I pinned it before I sew it together. I pulled the flap out to pin it. And I made sure that my piping, seam on my piping, was matching the seam on that flap. And what I'll do is stitch a little bit into the flap before I end the seam. Same thing on this side. I'm going to start a little bit in from the edge of the flap with some back tacking before I start sewing all the way around. And you can see that in some places I have extra fabric hanging out over the edge, and that's because these ties are very slippery and silky, and my back was cut a little bit bigger than my front, and I wanted to make sure it fit nicely, so you definitely need to pin this before you sew it. So it's all done, just have to turn it right side out. Perfect. And then I want to make sure my zipper is near my opening. So I'm going to squish this into here. Stuff it. I want to make sure my corners are sitting nicely in each corner, nested in there. And what I'm going to do is loosely stitch, blind stitch that to hold it shut. I'm going to start inside the piping so you don't see the knot, and I'm just going to take a couple of big blind stitches with this heavy thread, kind of like they did on the back of the ties to hold it together. And then that way, if it ever has to be taken apart again to get the fluff out and to dry clean, it'll be easy to just remove these quick stitches. Nice big loose line stitches. Just enough so that it doesn't gape open while it's being used. And then at the end I'll do a simple knot. I'll take a small stitch and go in the loop. I'll grab it and grab it again. And I can hide the end inside the piping. And then they want a button attached in the middle, so I'm going to take a nice heavy thread, and I'm just going to, in the center of the quilt here, I put my thread through the hole. Sew the button on, but I'm also going to go through to the back of the pillow so that I can give the pillow some form. So I just take my needle and I poke it straight down in and come out on the back of the pillow. I could put another button on this side, and I haven't decided yet what button to use. I have to ask the client. So I'm just going to, for now, take a stitch and come right back out from underneath the button here. And when I pull that, it gives it a nice little poof. I'll go one more time through the button and the fabric. Then I'm going to wrap it around a couple times and knot it, and I'll hide the end inside the pillow.